The Risk of Rain series has long been a staple of the roguelike genre, attracting and enthralling many players. Today I wanted to discuss what makes Risk of Rain so replayable, as well as its comments on morality and its stellar soundtrack. This may get a bit ranty, but I pinky promise I'll try my best to stay on track.
Risk of Rain is a roguelike game, meaning that every time you die, you must start from the very beginning. Risk of Rain has been known as a relatively difficult roguelike game. This is due in part to a unique mechanic that Hopo Games has incorporated: time. The game has a timer that every couple minutes changes the difficulty of the game. The game also allots a credit value for any enemies that it wants to spawn. So if the game wants to spawn many enemies, it must have enough credits to spawn them. As the timer progresses, the more credits the system is given, allowing it to spawn more and stronger enemies. This system adds a level of optimization to the gameplay, forcing the player to move as fast as they can to gather items, while also not allowing enemies to become too strong. The character design in Risk of Rain is also very clean feeling. All the characters' abilities synergize with the rest of the kit, making it feel very smooth and satisfying to play. For example, the Mercenary. The Mercenary uses a sword that deals a lot of damage, with the caveat of having to be very close to an enemy. Due to this need to be up close, he is given a lot of mobility. He has a dash that you can use multiple times if you hit an enemy, a slash that stalls him in the air for a short time, and another dash that at the end of it he becomes invincible and releases a flurry of slashes. The mobility in his kit allows him to dash in and to deal damage, or dash out to get to safety. The fact that all of his abilities do damage, while also being mobility tools, means that you must pick how you use your abilities, defensively or offensively. Every character has this amount of care placed into it, focusing on synergy and versatility of the skills. The versatility makes the game feel smoother because it gives you more agency as a player as to how you use them. The items are the game's primary way of strengthening the player. Items are separated into 5 categories: common, unique, legendary, equipment, and lunar.
The most important part of the game is creating your build. Your build is the arrangement of items you have, usually working together to utilize a certain game mechanic. For example, a largely popular build is the crit build. Every time you strike an enemy, you have a chance to deal 200% damage. With certain items, you can increase this 5% chance to a near guaranteed hit. And then you can get items that only trigger on critical strikes, like the Harvester Scythe. What you build can completely change the playstyle of your character and allows you to choose the build that fits your playstyle best. Want to get up close and personal? Build tank items like Infusion and Rose Buckler. Want to deal damage in a large area? Build Runald's Band and Wisp Jars to create AoE attacks on kill.
For how much importance there is on building the items that fit you best, how does this work when the items are completely random?
On every level, there will be at least one item printer. The item printer allows you to sacrifice an item of the same rarity to create an item that is inside the printer. This, of course, is also completely random, and consumes a random item of the same rarity from your inventory, unless you use a scrapper. Scrappers appear randomly, and are often annoying to find, but they are invaluable, as they allow you to turn an item into scrap. This scrap can be placed into a printer and effectively allows you to pick the items that are traded at an item printer. This extra agency allows you to shape your build into what is most convenient given your other items, and what playstyle fits you best. Lunar items are a type of item that act very differently from all the other items in the game. They are insanely powerful items that can be bought with a special currency called lunar coins. The reason why lunar items are so powerful is that they all come with some kind of balancing caveat. A perfect example of this is the shaped glass. It doubles your damage output, but halves your health. Each of the lunar items are just as potent, which is why they are often coveted by more experienced players of the game. Lunar items also have a caveat due to the fact that they alter the main game mechanic of the game: time. The main way to obtain lunar items is to find a statue and feed it a lunar coin. There is always one per level. After you beat the teleporter for that level, a blue portal will spawn, bringing you to the bazaar. Inside the bazaar, time does not pass, effectively allowing you to gain 5 powerful items without any enemies getting stronger. Lunar items give the entire game another dimension of choice, offering extreme power willing to deal with the consequences, and often end up being invaluable to more experienced players. The amount of choice items offer and the ability to master your playstyle of any given character makes Risk of Rain 2 an endlessly replayable game, but this is not even the tip of the iceberg. There also exists artifacts, which are modifiers that change an aspect of the game to be more difficult. For example, there is an artifact that makes it so every enemy spawns a wisp after it dies, or another artifact that spawns double enemies with half the HP. Artifacts add another level of difficulty to the game, and they're also stackable. There are countless configurations of artifacts that you can use, changing the game in many ways, allowing you to play again and again. The brunt of Risk of Rain's story takes place in the first game, and contains most of the points that I wanted to touch on, so I'm going to be talking more about that instead. The story starts with a cargo ship called the UES Contact Light picking up a signal from a nearby planet. After getting closer to the planet, an entity known as the Providence teleports onto the ship and destroys the command center, causing the ship and all of its cargo to rain down on the planet below. In the monster logs, we see our protagonists logging the different monsters they encounter on the planet, and their behavior. Throughout the monster logs, we see the degradation of his morals, eventually becoming bloodthirsty. A fact about a lot of the enemies in Risk of Rain is that many of them are non-hostile until they're attacked. As you mow through the inhabitants of the planet, you eventually make your way back to the Contact Light and kill Providence. Every boss in Risk of Rain has a title besides their name. Providence's title is Bulwark of the Weak, a bulwark being a type of shield. After you kill Providence and escape the planet, you get one final closing messages with the images of all the destruction you have caused. And so he left, with everything but his humanity. It is abundantly clear through the monster logs and boss titles that you are not the hero of Risk of Rain. You are a monster who slaughtered an entire planet of sentient creatures. In Risk of Rain 2, we play as a passenger on board the UES Safe Travels, here to rescue the crew of the Contact Light. After venturing across the planet, we find a man who is trapped on the moon. His name is Mithrix, and he was Providence's brother. Providence imprisoned him on the moon due to his feelings of hate towards the residents that the Providence has allowed on the planet. After killing Mithrix, the moon is attacked by Void Reavers. They are essentially time cops who arrest beings that they consider powerful. Having killed Mithrix, you are now a target, and they drag the moon into the void, but you escape on a shuttle trapped by Mithrix on the moon. The lore of both games is very extensive, and would be impossible for me to cover in this video without making it an hour long, so I can't elaborate much more. But the main point of the story is that essentially you are an invasive species that attacks these sentient creatures because your player sees them as monsters. Even in the second game, while society has collapsed due to the death of the Providence, Petrichor 5 still has a defined culture and inhabitants with wills and lives. We actively disrupt this by not only killing them, but also inadvertently destroying their moon. Both Risk of Rain games were created by Hobo Games, a studio created by Duncan Drummond and Paul Morse as students. The original Risk of Rain was intended to be a tower defense game, where the player would guard the crashed ship as enemies increased over time. The game would require the player to gather materials to make themselves stronger by leaving the ship for a while to gather them. Eventually, the creators realized that there wasn't much incentive to explore due to the threat of the ship being destroyed, so they chose to make it so the player would rather clear through procedurally generated levels instead. A while after making the game, they decided to make a sequel. Risk of Rain 2 was originally intended to be a 2D game, much like the first, but Duncan became very interested with the idea of having the items that you collected displayed on your character. This was very difficult in the 2D setting, so they messed around with a 2.5D model to see if that would work. But at some point, they decided to fully switch over to 3D for the sake of this one mechanic. Risk of Rain, the original, shares a lot of similarities to the Risk of Rain 2, except it is significantly harder. Unlike Risk of Rain 2, Risk of Rain is 2D. The game being 2D makes dodging much more difficult, but that's not just it. Your character also moves extremely slowly. Traversing the map is hard without movement items, and this is just exacerbated by the fact that before you can go to the next level, you must kill every enemy left on the stage after you beat the boss. Forcing you to kill everything to proceed, mixed with a slow move speed, wastes time, meaning enemies become even stronger. Moving slowly and having to completely clear a level, while it makes it more difficult, is not a fun kind of difficulty. It's more of a nuisance that stops you from accessing the actual fun part of the game. This is actually revised in Risk of Rain Returns, a remaster of the original game. In the new game, they add new characters, new maps, new items, new sprites, new artifacts, a better movement engine, and the ability to turn off some of the more annoying mechanics from the original. It completely fixes the issues of the first game while still capturing the difficulty. And the reason they decided to revisit the game was because this would be their last project together. After the creation of Risk of Rain Returns, Hopo Games has been put on an indefinite hiatus. The reason for this hiatus is that both Duncan and Paul have been offered positions at Valve working on their new game Deadlock. In Hopo Games' dissolution, they sold the rights of the series to Gearbox. Gearbox has stated their intent to continue to make DLC for Risk of Rain 2, and they have since delivered on that promise. In August of this year, Gearbox was officially released the first DLC for Risk of Rain 2, and it was a garbage fire. It was filled with bugs. Bugs so bad that some players couldn't even open the game without it crashing. And those who could play encountered bugs that caused major boss fights to be unwinnable, and others that caused instant random death. These bugs were not dealt with promptly, and left many fans of Risk of Rain 2 stressed about the future of the game. After the smoke settled and all the bugs were removed, what we were left with was a very lackluster DLC. The items were phenomenal and incorporated interesting mechanics, but the characters lacked a lot of what made the characters feel so good in the first place. There were 2 new characters introduced in the DLC, and 1 old one. The old character, Chef, was implemented well, but the other 2 just feel clunky. The False Sun is a melee character which has slow attacks and not very much mobility. The other 2 melee characters in the game, Mercenary and Loader, are mobile machines that can traverse the map in seconds, complementing their high damage and need to be in close range. The False Sun just doesn't have the tools to get in close and often feels unwieldy. He's capable of dealing large damage, but only if enemies walk into you, because there's not much you can do to close the distance. The other character I don't even want to talk about, because they suffer from the same problems. The kit just feels disjointed, with the abilities that don't flow well into each other. With these characters, there's very little opportunity to create your own playstyle, and that severely impacts the replayability. Since the failure of the DLC, Gearbox has put in place a 3-step plan to make the DLC better, which makes me feel a little bit better about the future of the game. The music for both games was composed and played by Chris Christodoulou, and something about his particular style really stuck with me when I first played the game. The music gives you the opposite feeling that a lot of Doom music gives you. Doom music makes you feel powerful, like a force of nature. In Risk of Rain, the music feels more like it's trying to make you feel small compared to this expansive planet that you've landed on. The combination of synths and distorted electric guitar resonates in this ethereal hum that just submerges you in the setting. Every track has a specific level that it will play on, and it helps communicate with the environment purely through sound. It builds up the story and communicates the emotion of the parts of the planet you visit. The music captures that feeling that you are hearing an echo of a society long past that you are only now just catching a glimpse of. I seriously recommend listening to music on your own, even if you don't play the game, because it's just that good. In conclusion, the Risk of Rain series tackles a lot of interesting concepts like replayability, morality, musical and environmental storytelling, and player agency. The game can build an expansive world with no dialogue, and the game is nearly infinitely replayable due to the countless different ways you can play the game. The story brings up interesting ideas and moral quandaries due to the nature of the character disrupting and damaging an otherwise thriving society. Overall, Risk of Rain was a game made with extreme care, and succeeded in everything that it set out to do. In the future, I hope that the game will continue to thrive, and I look forward to any new projects that Hopo Games may create in the future after their work at Valve.